in Kensington, and the director of the FBI says this is the largest takedown he's ever seen, and everyone should be paying attention.
Kensington Avenue in November 2025 looks like something straight out of a horror movie. Except this is real life happening right now in Philadelphia. Picture this. Bodies bent forward at 90-degree angles, frozen in place like human statues. People collapsed on sidewalks while cars just drive by like it's normal. And here's the thing that makes it even more disturbing. This isn't happening in some remote area. This is less than 2 hours from New York City, in the heart of America's 6th largest city. The streets under the elevated train tracks have earned a nickname that's both accurate and terrifying. America's Zombieland. These aren't people who are just high. They're locked in what locals call the zombie stance, a position so unnatural that it looks physically impossible. Some bent completely forward, hands nearly touching the ground, frozen like that for hours. Others leaning at angles that should make them fall, but they don't. So what's causing this? It's a cocktail that keeps getting deadlier. First, there's fentanyl, which is already 50 times more powerful than heroin. Then they started mixing it with Xylazine, a horse tranquilizer that showed up around 2020. But now, in 2025, there's something new, Medetomidina. This stuff causes violent tremors, seizures, and withdrawal symptoms in just 2 hours. 2 hours. That's how fast your body starts screaming for the next dose. Bodies frozen mid-motion, sometimes for 3 or 4 hours straight. The Medetomidina hits the central nervous system so hard that people literally cannot move. And when the effect starts wearing off, that's when the real horror begins. Uncontrollable shaking, potential cardiac arrest, convulsions that look like something from an exorcism movie. This is why ambulances roll through Kensington every 15 minutes like clockwork. And here's something that should terrify everyone. Narcan doesn't work anymore. For years, naloxone was the miracle drug that could reverse opioid overdoses in seconds. But Xylazine and Medetomidina aren't opioids. They're sedatives that work on completely different brain receptors. The number of people dying right there on the street has jumped from 12% in 2022 to 34% in 2025. Philadelphia records over 1,200 overdose deaths every year since 2022. Kensington alone accounts for double the city's average rate. From January to August 2025, there were 469 fatal overdoses documented. That's one person dying every 12 hours just in this neighborhood. Law enforcement seized 27 million doses of fentanyl in the metro area this year. But what really drives this crisis is how cheap everything is. You can get high for $5. $10 gets you what dealers call a dime, which is supposedly the best quality. The supply chain is direct. Mexican cartels manufacturing fentanyl with Chinese precursors. Dominican and New York organizations handling distribution. Then there are the families. Hundreds of missing person posters taped to light poles throughout Kensington. Parents traveling from other states every weekend, walking these dangerous streets with photos. There's this one story that shows how fast this place can swallow someone. A man drove into Kensington with a Mercedes-Benz, planning to stay for just a weekend. 2 weeks later, people saw him walking around with nothing. No car, no money, no will to leave. McPherson Square has an official name, but nobody calls it that anymore. Everyone knows it as Needle Park. The ground is absolutely carpeted with used syringes. Orange caps everywhere, lighters scattered around, burnt spoons, rubber tourniquets hanging from tree branches. Kids and dogs are still playing here, because if you live in this neighborhood, this is the only park you've got. The contrast is surreal. McPherson Library sits right there, this beautiful Victorian-era building with gorgeous architecture. Instead, it's the backdrop for one of the most visible drug markets in America. Tents used to line the perimeter until the city started clearing encampments in 2024, but the needles remain, thousands of them, probably tens of thousands. Before September 2025, there were roughly 750 people using drugs simultaneously in and around this park at any given time. Try to picture that. A space, maybe 2 city blocks, packed with people in various stages of injection, collapse, or that terrifying zombie stance. The scene operates 24/7. Dealers work in shifts, like it's a legitimate business. A reporter watched a guy get $1, walk 10 feet, and immediately buy a dose from another guy. $1. That's how accessible this stuff is. And that's why people keep coming back every 2 hours, when the Medetomidina wears off and the withdrawal hits like a sledgehammer. The ritual is always the same. Find a spot, pull out the syringe, find a vein that's still usable, inject. Within 60 seconds, the collapse. Some people just slump over. Others go into that bent forward zombie pose. A few start convulsing immediately. Local workers point out that addicts actually prefer this park specifically because it's so visible. When everyone can see you, you're less likely to get robbed. The emergency response system has basically collapsed under the volume. Fire trucks roll through every 15 minutes. A reporter counted 6 fire trucks in 15 minutes on the same street. Paramedics arrive, pull out Narcan, and in cases involving the new drug cocktails, it does absolutely nothing. If Narcan doesn't work within 2 minutes, they move straight to intubation and rush to the hospital. This costs Philadelphia an estimated $15 million annually just in emergency responses to Kensington. The personnel burn out fast too. Stations serving this area have a 60% annual turnover rate. Paramedics transfer out, take medical leave, or quit entirely because responding to the same blocks over and over, watching people die from the same drugs repeatedly, it destroys you mentally. And then there's the question nobody in city government wants to answer. Why do they keep responding to the exact same locations constantly? Why not set up permanent medical stations? The cynic's answer, which more residents are starting to believe, is that the city wants this contained to specific blocks. Keep the chaos in Kensington, keep it away from Center City. The residents who stayed have adapted in heartbreaking ways. They've developed routes home that avoid the worst blocks. They walk in groups after dark. Some have started escort services where volunteers walk kids to school. Property values have cratered, but landlords still charge $800 to $1,200 for apartments with rat infestations and broken plumbing. But probably the saddest part is watching families walk through Needle Park holding photos of their missing loved ones. Every weekend, people come from New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, even from the Midwest sometimes. Most of the time, nobody remembers faces. Everyone here looks like they're dying because they are. And then the family has to make an impossible decision. Do they approach someone who's in the middle of using, someone who might not even recognize them, someone who might get violent or run away? There's something that doesn't add up about Kensington. There are cops everywhere. 75 new officers deployed just in summer 2025. Police stations, surveillance cameras, regular foot patrols. And yet, people are still shooting up on every corner in broad daylight. Dealers are still operating openly. So what's actually happening here? A local worker said something that explains it perfectly. They want this to stay here. He wasn't being paranoid. He was pointing out what everyone in the neighborhood knows, but nobody official will admit. The heavy police presence isn't there to end the drug market. It's there to contain it. Keep it in these specific blocks. Stop it from spreading. This isn't unique to Philadelphia. Portland has Chinatown and Old Town. San Francisco has the Tenderloin. Seattle has Pioneer Square. Los Angeles has Skid Row. Every major city has designated an area where they concentrate services for the homeless and mentally ill. And inevitably, that becomes the drug market too. It's politically easier than dealing with the problem citywide. Philadelphia's official strategy is called the PI Plan: Prevention, Intervention, Enforcement. Mayor Sherrell Parker launched it in 2024. From March to December 2024, police made 2,500 arrests related to drug sales. They seized $40 million worth of drugs. In 2025, arrests of dealers increased by 58%. The enforcement part is definitely happening. Intervention looks good in press releases too. Riverview Wellness Village got $100 million in funding. It's designed to house 600 people. Right now, it has 200 residents running at 1/3 capacity. Why? Because most people don't have the insurance required to get in, or they've got warrants. The Wellness Court program started in January 2025. They've processed 187 cases. 10% completed successfully. 10%. Prevention focuses mainly on cleaning up visible signs of the crisis. Faster response to 311 calls about needles and garbage. Clearing homeless encampments. Installing more cameras. All of this makes the area look better. But here's what the statistics also show. The drug dealers just moved 2 streets over. Somerset Street is now what locals call the new ground zero. The market adapted. Dealers started using addicts as frontline sellers more, which complicates arrests, because you're busting someone who's also a victim. They started using more lookouts, more rotating locations, more indoor dealing instead of open-air markets. The volume of drugs sold hasn't decreased, and this is where those contradictory statistics come in. Shootings in District 24 dropped by 82% compared to 2022. Philadelphia's overall homicide count is down to 200 cases by November, 15% lower than 2024. The number of people visibly using on the streets dropped from 750 to 400. By any measure of public safety and order, things improved significantly. But ask people who work in harm reduction, and they'll tell you this is just displacement. The same number of people are using, they're just doing it in alleys and abandoned buildings instead of main streets. The same amount of drugs are being sold, just more discreetly. It's not that the problem got better. The problem got better at hiding. Residents are divided. Gloria Cartagena says things have genuinely improved. Less trash, fewer gunshots at night, neighbors looking out for each other more. Teresa Groen sees it differently. Dealers on every side street, police harassing innocent people, and the fundamental issue that people are still dying at the same rate. Then there's the money side. Landlords in Kensington are still charging $800 to $1,200 monthly for apartments that should probably be condemned. Rats in the walls, broken heating, sometimes no hot water. But where else are people supposed to go? To understand how Kensington became what it is today, you need to know how the drugs evolved. In the 2010 seconds, it was traditional heroin. Dangerous, but predictable. Then 2016 changed everything when fentanyl flooded in from China through Mexican cartels. Fentanyl is 50 times stronger than heroin. A lethal dose is about 2 milligrams, roughly the size of a few grains of salt. It's cheaper to make, easier to transport, more profitable for cartels. Within 2 years, fentanyl replaced traditional heroin on the East Coast. Overdose deaths immediately skyrocketed. Around 2020, dealers realized something. Fentanyl's high was powerful, but short. Users came back every 4 to 6 hours. What if they could make people return faster? That's when Xylazine showed up. It's a horse tranquilizer that causes extreme sedation, lasting much longer than fentanyl alone. Mix them together and you get a more intense, longer-lasting high. But Xylazine had horrifying side effects. It causes necrosis, meaning flesh literally dies while you're alive. Users developed wounds that wouldn't heal, ulcers exposing muscle and bone, spreading infections. People walking around with legs looking chewed by animals, arms with holes to the bone. This is why they called it the zombie drug before Medetomidina even appeared. Now in 2025, Medetomidina has entered the supply, gradually replacing Xylazine. This makes Xylazine look mild. Medetomidina is an even stronger veterinary sedative for large animals during surgery. The human lethal dose mixed with fentanyl is around 0.5 milligrams. Microscopic, invisible to the naked eye. And withdrawal hits in just 2 hours instead of 8 to 12 with Xylazine. The effects create that zombie pose everyone sees in videos. Medetomidina causes complete muscle control loss. People collapse or freeze in whatever position they were in. Respiratory system slows to almost nothing. Heart rate drops dangerously. And because it's not an opioid, Narcan can't reverse it. The withdrawal keeps people trapped. After about 2 hours, bodies start screaming for more. Violent tremors spreading through the whole body. Severe anxiety and panic attacks. Racing heart, feeling like it'll explode. Some have seizures. The pain is worse than heroin withdrawal, which is already one of the most brutal human experiences. So they use, again, not to get high, just to stop the pain. Every 2 hours, all day, every day. Why do dealers prefer Medetomidina despite these effects? It creates dependency faster than anything they've tried. Heroin takes months before serious addiction. Fentanyl hooks people in weeks. Medetomidina creates severe dependency in days. From a business perspective, it's perfect. From a human perspective, it's a chemical that enslaves people to a 2-hour clock. Here's why Narcan doesn't work. Naloxone blocks opioid receptors in the brain. When someone overdoses on heroin or fentanyl, breathing stops because opioids suppress respiratory function. Narcan kicks opioids off those receptors, breathing resumes. But Xylazine and Medetomidina aren't opioids. They're sedatives working on completely different brain parts. Narcan has nothing to block, nothing to reverse. Paramedics arrive, hit someone with Narcan, nothing happens. the person continues convulsing or stays locked in zombie position. Now, the protocol is immediate intubation and rush to hospital. But even that doesn't always work because the cocktail is so complex. Sometimes fentanyl mixed with medetomidina, mixed with cocaine, mixed with whatever else. Every batch different. Every dealer mixing their own recipe. The mortality rate tells the story. In 2022, about 12% of people who overdosed on Kensington streets died before reaching the hospital. By 2025, 34%, nearly tripling in 3 years, almost entirely because of these new drug cocktails that emergency responders have no effective field treatment for. The drug market in Kensington operates like a franchise system. At the top, you've got Mexican cartels manufacturing fentanyl in labs throughout Sinaloa and Jalisco. They're importing precursor chemicals from China and India, cooking the fentanyl, then moving it across the Texas-Mexico border. From there, it travels up Interstate 95 straight to Philadelphia. Once the product reaches Philadelphia, control shifts to distribution networks, run primarily by organizations from New York and the Dominican Republic. They run it like a business. They rent blocks, literally paying local property owners or intimidating them into cooperation. The October 2025 FBI raid that arrested 33 members of the Weymouth Street gang revealed they were moving products worth millions monthly through just a few blocks. The actual dealers on the corners make surprisingly little money. In 2025, street-level dealers report earning about $400 weekly. During the pandemic, that number was $1,500 because demand was higher and there was less competition. Now, the market is oversaturated. Too many dealers, too much product, prices dropping. The structure goes: lookouts watching for police, runners carrying product between stash houses and cellars, and dealers handling direct transactions. Below them are the addicts who work for doses instead of money. They'll act as lookouts, run interference with police, sometimes even make sales themselves in exchange for their next hit. Here's something that shows how integrated this system is with addiction. A reporter watched a woman who'd been robbed the day before, and the next day, she was working for the person who robbed her. Why? Because he controlled access to drugs, and she needed them more than she needed justice or dignity. When withdrawal hits every 2 hours and feels like your body's tearing apart, you'll do anything. The 27 million doses of fentanyl seized in the Philadelphia metro area this year sounds impressive, until you realize that's probably less than 10% of what actually made it through. Law enforcement estimates that for every bust, 9 similar shipments get through undetected. The cartels factor in these losses. It's just cost of doing business. Medetomidina enters the supply chain differently. Some is stolen from veterinary clinics and hospitals. Some is imported from Eastern Europe. Dealers discover that mixing it with fentanyl creates that intense 2-hour dependency cycle that keeps customers coming back like clockwork. From a business perspective, it's perfect product design. But here's what's really interesting: the drug tourism phenomenon. People travel from other states specifically to Kensington because of the price, potency, and availability. The case of the man with the Mercedes-Benz is typical. He drove in from out-of-state planning a weekend visit. The dealers immediately identified him as someone with money. They got him high, borrowed his car, introduced him to other users. 2 weeks later, his car was gone, his money was gone, and he was just another body on the street. The viral videos on YouTube and TikTok actually fuel this tourism. Millions of views on videos, titled things like Kensington Zombieland 2025, comments from people saying they want to visit, want to see it in person. Some are aspiring documentarians. Some are addiction researchers. Some are just curious thrill seekers. And some are addicts looking for the most potent supply they can find. The videos meant to expose the crisis are inadvertently advertising it. Behind every statistic, there's a human story. Joseph came from Florida to care for his 65-year-old mother. He was clean, had his life together. Then he relapsed. Because he didn't want his mother evicted, he put himself on the streets. Now he sleeps on trains and buses, sometimes on sidewalks, when exhaustion hits. He hasn't seen his son in 4 years. That pain pushed him over the edge. He describes himself as an empath, someone who feels pain so intensely it becomes physical. When asked about his situation, he started crying before finishing. This is what drugs do. Strip away every defense until you're exposed to all the pain you were escaping. Joseph tried getting help. He has Blue Cross insurance. But the rehab facility was Florida-based and didn't accept his specific plan. Most rehabilitation centers near Kensington either don't accept certain insurance or maintain 3 to 6 month waiting lists. By the time someone's name reaches the top, they're often dead or too far gone to remember applying. Ron follows a different path to the same place. He's addicted to crack, but maintains this spiritual perspective. He sees God's creation trapped by the devil, believes people can be saved through prayer, but he's using multiple times daily to keep his heart from racing out of control. The crack keeps him alive while killing him, trapped in impossible contradiction, believing in salvation while unable to save himself. Both identified the same failure. Rehabilitation centers, right in Kensington's middle. You're putting recovering people in the geographic center of the East Coast's largest drug market. Recidivism rate speaks for itself. 89% relapse within 30 days. They walk out after weeks of hard work, turn 3 corners, right back where they started. Old dealers on familiar corners, friends still using. The pull becomes too strong. What people actually need is long-term residential treatment, far from Philadelphia. Somewhere they physically cannot walk to a dealer. Time to process trauma, rebuild habits, remember who they were. But that costs more. Riverview Wellness Village was designed for 600 but houses only 200, partly because eligibility requirements exclude most people who need help most desperately. Then there's the other side. Families searching for missing loved ones. Every weekend, people drive from New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, sometimes the Midwest, carrying photos, showing them to anyone willing to look. Usually nobody remembers because everyone looks hauntingly similar, emaciated, hollow-eyed, destroyed. Occasionally someone points toward tents or a corner, says they might have seen that person days ago. That's the impossible decision. Approach someone clearly high who might not recognize you, might get violent or run, wait for clarity that might never come, call police knowing the system releases them back within 24 hours. Private services charge $500 to $2,000 just to locate someone. But locating doesn't mean rescuing, just means you know which corner they're dying on. Success rate for family interventions is below 5%. Most people aren't ready to leave. Addiction too powerful, trauma unhealed. They've lost so much that starting over feels impossible. Some families return every weekend for months, even years. Some give up when emotional toll becomes unbearable. Some never find their loved one alive. They discover weeks later that the person they searched for overdosed in an alley, buried in a city cemetery under a number instead of a name. The grief is devastating either way. Here's where we are with Kensington in late 2025. Official statistics say things are improving, but the streets tell a complicated story. Shootings down 82% compared to 2022. Homicides across Philadelphia down 15%. Visible drug users dropped from 750 to 400. More arrests, 40 million in drugs seized. By traditional metrics, the city's making progress. But walk those streets and the drug market is equally active. It just moved. Somerset Street is the new ground zero. Side streets and alleys host transactions that used to happen openly. Dealers adapted. More lookouts, rotating locations, using addicts as sellers. Volume hasn't decreased. The business got smarter about avoiding enforcement. This raises the uncomfortable question officials refuse to address. Is this containment or solution? Everything about how Philadelphia handles Kensington suggests managing optics more than solving the crisis. Heavy police presence prevents spreading. Clean up visible areas for cameras. Push users into less visible locations where they're easier to ignore. Other cities run the same playbook. San Francisco's Tenderloin, Portland's Chinatown, Seattle's Pioneer Square, LA's Skid Row. Every major city designates a neighborhood for homeless and drug problems. Politically easier than dealing with it citywide. Wealthy residents don't want encampments visible, don't want kids seeing injections. So cities create containment zones, whether they admit it or not. Containment doesn't solve anything. It relocates suffering to areas where fewer people with power witness it. 400 homeless cleared from Kensington Avenue didn't get housing, they scattered. Arrested dealers were replaced within days. Seized drugs represented maybe 10% of actual volume. For every intervention and adaptation, while the city celebrates reduced numbers, people still die at the same rate. Medetomidina creates withdrawal. So intense users consume every 2 hours to avoid convulsions. Narcan doesn't work on these cocktails. The flesh-rotting effects haven't disappeared, The trauma driving people to drugs isn't being addressed at all. What would actual solutions look like? Treatment capacity matching the problem's scope. Pennsylvania needs thousands more residential beds, far from drug markets with months-long programs. That requires investment nobody's willing to make. Mandatory treatment faces constitutional questions. You can't force someone without criminal conviction, and success rates are low anyway. Then there's supply. Fentanyl precursors from China, finished product from Mexican cartels, Medetomidina from veterinary suppliers or Eastern Europe. This isn't a Philadelphia problem. Philadelphia can solve alone, requires federal enforcement, international cooperation, diplomatic pressure, not happening at needed scale. Some point to international models. Portugal decriminalized all drugs in 2001 with mandatory treatment. Mixed results. Overdose deaths stayed low, but use didn't decrease as hoped. Netherlands allows supervised consumption sites reducing overdose deaths but facing massive US political opposition. Truth is, no single solution works cleanly. Harm reduction saves lives, short term, but doesn't address addiction. Enforcement clears streets temporarily, but doesn't reduce use. Treatment works for some, but has high failure rates and insufficient capacity. As long as demand exists for drugs that obliterate pain, supply meets that demand. Kensington isn't an anomaly. It's a symptom of larger failures. America loses over 110,000 people annually to overdoses. Every city has its version, where society's failures concentrate, where the safety net fails, where mental health crises go untreated, where economic hopelessness meets chemical escape. Maybe that's the real question. Why does the wealthiest nation in history consistently fail its most vulnerable? Why 3 to 6 month treatment waiting lists when people need help immediately? Why billions on enforcement that just displaces problems rather than treatment that might solve them? Why do we tolerate seeing human beings bent at impossible angles, bodies rotting alive, and consider that acceptable? Kensington will still be Zombieland next year unless something fundamentally changes, not small policy adjustments or increased police. Fundamental change in how we approach addiction as a society. Until that happens, more people disappear into these streets. More families search for loved ones they'll never find. More bodies freeze in that zombie stance under elevated trains. The reflection we see in Kensington isn't pretty, but it's us. Our policies, priorities, collective choices about who matters. Until we're willing to look honestly at that reflection, nothing changes. And that might be the scariest part. We've grown comfortable with this level of suffering as long as it stays contained to neighborhoods we don't drive through. As long as the zombies stay in Zombieland, we can pretend this isn't happening. But it is, right now. And tomorrow will be exactly the same unless we decide it shouldn't be.